Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one from a familiar author that I've explored before and is considered one of my favorite authors, and one that is also on my 2023 TBR. I am pushing through that list, trying to make it through all the books that I have picked out there. So I'm eager to talk about this, and it is a book that is about people and drinking wine and celebrating with your friends. I am referring to Tortilla Flat by John Steinbeck, which was published in 1935. For those who don't know, John Steinbeck is an American author. I've talked about him on this channel before, so I don't need to go into too many details. Just refer back to the Dubious Battle, or the I think it's called The Stranger, or the Cannery Row, all the books that I've talked about on this channel before. He is known for writing short stories as well as novels and nonfiction too. He's most noted for The Grapes of Wrath as well as In Dubious Battle, one of my favorite books. East of Eden, again another one of my favorite books. The Pearl and Of Mice and Men, all high quality. Noted for writing about injustice and looking in depth at specific characters. And I've been talking about a lot of his books on this channel, again, because he's one of my favorite authors. And I highly recommend that you go seek out his work. I think the only book that I haven't really enjoyed is Cannery Row. And there are some similarities to this book with Cannery Row, which I'll talk about later in the analysis section. But for the most part, I enjoyed Tortilla Flat. I plan on spoiling the book in the summary and analysis section. It was written in 1935 after all. So if you are, I'm going to recommend this. So if you want to read it, go out and read it now, and then come back to this video so that we can talk about it and whatnot. So without further ado, let's talk about Tortilla Flat. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we'll move on from there. So Tortilla Flat focuses on the character of Danny and his friends. Danny is a paisan, which I believe is a person of mixed race heritage. He is Anglican as well as Spanish, Mexican, a bit of a mix of different races there. And he is living in Monterey, California, in presumably post-World War I America. He served in the military during World War I. However, he didn't actually fight. He wrangled cattle or served on a ranch in Texas. So although he and his friends are veterans, not all of them actually fought in the war, which is a little bit funny. And at the start of the story, Danny learns that his grandfather has died, and he has inherited 2 houses as a result of that, making it so that he has a place to live now, and he can also rent out another one of those houses, which he does to his friend Pilon. Pilon and him are both kind of lazy, unburdened individuals, not really striving to work, but still pretty happy with, and still somewhat able to get things out of life as a result. And so Danny rents to Pilon, although it's noted that Pilon never really intends to pay, and Danny never really intends to ask, except for when he needs a thing or two here and there. And eventually Danny's friends Pablo and Jesus move in with Pilon as well, and they never pay rent, although Pilon expects them to in case Danny ever asks. But mostly it's just them trying to wrangle up wine and food whenever they need to. Unfortunately, Pilon's house accidentally burns down near the beginning of the story, and so they all move in with Danny, which he is fine with, although he asserts that he asserts that like they should never sleep in his bed. That belongs to him. Eventually, Palan and Danny and them all decide that they want to get more money, and they decide to get this from a man that the town calls the Pirate. He's kind of an old man that lives with dogs in a chicken coop on abandoned property. And the Pirate is a very friendly guy, and he also apparently he chops firewood and delivers it to town, makes a quarter every day, and stows that money away in a hoard. And Palan and Danny want to end up taking that money from the Pirate, which they eventually manage to trick and confuse him to give it to him. But once they do come across the money, they're like, "Oh, we don't want this. This is too much a burden. You should hide it. Keep it for yourself." But they do let the Pirate live with them as well, and things are all the better for it. They also come across a soldier in their time. I don't think the soldier stays with them, but the soldier does have a baby, and that baby dies. It turns out the soldier ran afoul of his corporal or something like that down in Mexico, and so he took the baby, which was the wife's and his baby, but unfortunately the baby died of some sickness. It's a sadder moment in the story. There's also a man named Big Joe Porticky, who is kind of like, he's a decent person, but he has a tendency to steal from people. And he ends up stealing a couple coins from the Pirate. And when the friends find out, they end up beating him almost to death. But then they all make sure to hug him, make sure he feels better, and tend to his wounds. They just wanted to teach him a lesson at that point. And when they're recounting the Pirate's money, they discover that he actually has enough to buy something he's been wanting to buy, which is a golden St. Francis candlestick that he intends to give to the nearby church. And it appears that like St. Francis is the patron saint of the environment, but also of the down and outs of society. So kind of representing the Pirate as well as Danny and his friends. The Pirate has some bad clothing, like he kind of looks disheveled, so he can't go into the church. But Danny and his friends give him their clothes so that he's able to participate in the sort of mass that is talked about with that regards St. Francis and this new golden candlestick that the church is very happy with having. Danny and his friends also help a woman named Teresina and her many children. Teresina has like 10 or so children, and the neighborhood is kind of alarmed by the fact that she lives in poverty. But every year that there's a bean harvest, and whatever beans are left she takes, which often results in multiple pounds of beans in her house. And the school district is alarmed that like all her children seem to be eating are tortillas and beans. But she notes that that's all the children really need, and so like everything is kind of taken care of for her children in that regard. But when there's a sort of a failure in the bean harvest one year, Danny and his friends step up and help her. And later she has a child, which is indicated that it might be Danny or one of his friends, as they all kind of sleep with Teresina throughout the story. Later, Danny, kind of realizing that his life is disheveled or something like that, kind of goes on a bender where he leaves the house and starts drinking and gets arrested and runs into trouble with members of the local community, including one who argues that he has the new deed to Danny's house, but Danny's friends just burned that deed in a little bit of an effort to confuse that person. But eventually Danny returns, and they throw a party for Danny in order to make him feel better. Unfortunately, Danny once again starts drinking, and he challenges some unknown foe to a fight outside, and he ends up falling into a ravine and dying as a result. A funeral is held for Danny, but his friends aren't able to attend because, again, they look kind of disheveled. But they stand outside and pay their respects to Danny, a man that they loved and considered to be noble. And as the story comes to a close, they're all gathered inside Danny's house, and they realize that the bond between them kind of has to end at this point, and they don't want the burden of owning this house. So they burn it down, or they allow it to burn down, and they all go their separate ways, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with Tortilla Flat. It seems like Steinbeck is talking about friendship, poverty, religion, life's burdens, those kinds of ideas. Stuff that kind of shows up in other stories that he's written as well. One of the ideas that Steinbeck seems to be writing about is life's burdens, or the lack thereof in this story. Danny and his friends value having no responsibility. They don't want to do anything other than drink and mess around and just live their life that way. In that regard, they're kind of vagrants because many of them don't seem to have a house. They live in the woods, or they sleep in the town, and I don't think the town really minds about it. It seems like a lot of men kind of live their life this way, and it doesn't seem like there's much wrong with that vagrant lifestyle, because for Danny and his friends, as long as they have food, as long as they have water and some of those necessities, everything is okay. And they especially love wine. For Danny and his friends, like the friendship, the company of friends, and wine is all that matters. They're proclaimed to be having philosophical discussions, but I kind of doubt that. They're talking a lot of nonsense a lot of the times. But it seems like that those are the things that they value. Things change for Danny throughout the story. He becomes increasingly burdened by this house that he owns, as well as the burden of rent. He doesn't want to pay rent, or he doesn't want to have to force his friend to pay rent to him. And he doesn't want to really own the house. He doesn't want the burden of ownership of property, because that's one more thing that he has to think of, and he wants to be carefree. I think he likes having a bed to sleep in, but there's some nuance there in that there's a difference between having a bed and a safe place to sleep and having to own a house and be responsible for all of that. And Danny seems to be someone who shuns responsibility at every opportunity. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. Palan noticed that the worry of property was setting on Danny's face. No more in life would the face be free of care. No more would Danny break windows now that he had windows of his own to break. Palan had been right. He had been raised among his fellows. His shoulders had straightened to withstand the complexity of life, but one cry of pain escaped him before he left for all time his old and simple existence. Palan, he said sadly, I wish you owned it and I could come to live with you. And I think that really gets at the carefree nature of Danny, and how he's just like, I wish you owned it instead of me and I could live with you, so that I wouldn't have all these burdens and have to be a responsible adult when I'd rather not have to do any of that. And at the end of the story, we see Danny go on a bender as a result of all of that. It's all based on his frustrations. You could argue the frustrations represent two different sides. Either Danny knows that he needs to grow up at some point, and he refuses to do so, and so his bender is kind of like his last gasp before he inevitably, faces his own death. Or you could argue that it's sort of Danny trying to live this lifestyle forever, but it's not really possible for him to do that. Like, society's burdens eventually come crashing down on him, and as a result, death comes for him, because he's not willing to move on to anything else. And so, unfortunately, although you'd want to live a carefree lifestyle forever, perhaps Steinbeck is arguing that that's not always possible, and that for someone like Danny, it's eventually going to come roaring back to him, and he's going to have to do something, or something's going to happen to him as a result. Another big theme of Tortilla Flat is that of religion. Steinbeck is talking a lot about God here. He does that in a lot of his stories, East of Eden in particular, given the title of it there. But God and Bible seem to be important for Danny and their friends, or his friends. There's a lot of talk of Jesus, a lot of talk of forgiveness. A big part of the story is about Saint Francis, how Saint Francis seems to be important to the pirate, and indeed, Saint Francis is the patron saint of the down and outs, like Danny and his friends. So it makes sense why St. Francis would be so important to them. What's really interesting is the hypocrisy that takes place, because although Danny and his friends proclaim to be, holy or biblical or religious men, their actions speak differently, because Danny and his friends frequently steal from other people. Like they give back in some way through wine and whatnot, but and there does seem to be hypocrisy there, where they're stealing. They're not as noble as they proclaim to be. They're not as holy as they claim to be. They're making their community a little bit worse in a number of ways. Maybe that's Steinbeck arguing that as long as you're not actively hurting other people, you can still be holy. Or maybe he's trying to show the hypocrisy there, and that some people can claim to be holy, but maybe they're actually not. Because there does seem to be a sloth nature of Danny and his friends, which is one of the 7 deadly sins. It does seem to conflict with what's happening in this story. But I do think because Steinbeck acknowledges it and points out that these people are hypocritical, and sometimes you do have people who are hypocritical, but they're not really hurting anyone in the end. There's still room for that love of God or something like that. Steinbeck also seems to be talking a lot about poverty. In fact, this does feel like poverty porn at times, glorifying or hyping up the noble nature of poverty. And although Danny owns Danny owns a home, he is still in poverty. He doesn't really have anything else to his nature. He doesn't have a lot of money on him. He wasn't even earning rent money from Palan when Palan was renting from him. But he still has his needs taken care of, whether it is working for a few hours each week, or just stumbling across some wine and food in the community, or being taken care of by his neighbors, which is a big thing that Steinbeck is trying to get at, because a lot of the neighbors in this story are very supportive of Danny and his friends, kind of hyping up how even though there might be poverty in this community, these people still have the community. And that's really important. Something we don't see a lot these days, as communities have become suburbia or cordoned off, and you don't have a lot of support like that anymore, in place of homeowners associations who hate the idea of community at all. And yeah, indeed, Danny's friends help him thrive. There seems to be a funny little nobility in poverty, as I was saying before. The story of Teresina and her children, how although Teresina is in poverty, her family still has enough to eat, because she's able to go through the bean fields and collect whatever hasn't been harvested. And how although there seems to be a lot of kids crawling over a dirty floor, and a lot of insects crawling around in her house, Teresina and her family have everything that they need, the basic necessities met, and for that, everything is great for them. So again, hyping up the value of community, and noting that those in poverty, are not less than those who seem to have money. I also want to note how there is some high quality, beautiful writing, as there is in most Steinbeck works. Just noting the community of Tortilla Flat and the surrounding city of Monterey, and noting the smelliness of the fish district and whatnot. I think Steinbeck does some pretty high quality writing here, as well as some great use of humor, because there's a lot of really funny elements of the story, whether it be something that Danny and his friends say, or just something that the narrator notes. It's funny, one thing to note there is how Danny frequently ends up in jail, but sometimes he's able to escape because the jailer ends up drinking wine with him, and they go out into the community, and then Danny passes out somewhere else, and they can't find Danny, and so the jail looks for Danny, but they eventually just give up, and they forget that they ever tried to arrest him in the first place. Noting that one of the jailer himself has been in jail multiple times, and one time he was able to just break out because they forgot he still had the key on him. So kind of a very silly, exaggerated way of small town lifestyle that Steinbeck is trying to get at. I will say that Tortilla Flat can be unfocused at times. It focuses on, each chapter is about a specific character, but there is no overarching story, so it can be kind of vague or less focused, with no strict plot per se, which can make it hard to read for some people. But that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's not the traditional type of story that you would think of. In that way, it kind of reminds me of Cannery Row, because Cannery Row was focused on specific characters and specific aspects of that community rather than a through line or anything. However, I will say Tortilla Flat is much stronger structured than Cannery Row. Cannery Row felt vague, and there wasn't a focus that kept you grounded. But Tortilla Flat keeps you grounded in Danny and his friends and makes it a lot easier to follow in that way. So I do think this is a pretty high quality read and much better than Cannery Row because of that. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Tortilla Flat by John Steinbeck. A high quality book, already one of the best that I've read in this short year so far. So I do recommend that you go seek this out if you haven't done so already. Steinbeck novels are always a treat, even if they're less focused like Cannery Row, or more character focused like Tortilla Flat. I'm sure if you enjoy like Grapes of Wrath or In Dubious Battle, you'll probably also enjoy this one because it has that signature Steinbeck writing. If you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Tortilla Flat. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that people can find out about Steinbeck if they don't already know, or Tortilla Flat if they haven't read that yet. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and paisano travels. Farewell.